The evening sky in Portland was fading into shades of orange and purple, the kind of autumn sunset that always made Claire Bennett pause for a moment before she turned on the classroom lights. She had spent years teaching, and though she loved her work, the rhythm of parent-teacher meetings often felt predictable. Parents would walk in, smile politely, listen to her comments about grades and behavior, and leave with a handshake. Claire knew the pattern well, and tonight had been no different till she looked at the schedule and saw the last name of the day. Emma Foster. Emma was a student Claire admired deeply. At just 10 years old, she carried herself with a curiosity that set her apart. She wasn't the loudest child in class, nor the most talkative. But there was something about her questions, the way she looked at the world, that made Claire see her as special. Still, when Claire thought about the upcoming meeting, she didn't expect anything out of the ordinary. She stacked Emma's work neatly on her desk, prepared her notes, and glanced at the clock. A few minutes later, the door creaked open. Emma stepped inside first, her backpack swinging as she walked with the confident stride only children seemed to have. But what made Claire pause was the man holding her hand. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed simply in a jacket that had clearly seen better days. His presence filled the room before he even spoke. His eyes were calm, yet carried a heaviness that didn't belong to a man with such a warm smile. "Good evening," he said, as he extended his hand. His voice was low, steady, but there was something behind it, like an echo of fatigue. "I'm Daniel, Emma's dad." Claire shook his hand. And for the briefest moment she felt something unusual, a kind of awareness that she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just the strength of his grip or the steadiness of his gaze. It was the way he looked at her, as if he wasn't just going through the motions of another parent meeting. His eyes were really seeing her. They sat down, Emma between them, and Claire began with her usual rhythm. She talked about Emma's progress, how she excelled in reading and had a natural gift for storytelling. Daniel leaned forward, listening intently, nodding at every detail, his smile appearing in small flashes as Claire described Emma's strengths. Most parents sat politely and waited for the conversation to end. But Daniel's focus made Claire feel like what she was saying mattered. She noticed little things. The way his hand rested protectively on the table near Emma's, the way his brow furrowed when Claire mentioned that Emma sometimes doubted herself, the way his shoulders relaxed whenever Claire reassured him about his daughter's abilities. Each reaction was subtle. But Claire found herself watching him almost as closely as she was speaking. She reminded herself that this was work, that she was a teacher and this was nothing more than a professional meeting. But her heart was stubborn, quickening with each exchange. She tried to ignore it, telling herself it was just because Daniel seemed different from the other parents, more open, more invested. Still, deep down, she knew it was more than that. The classroom, which usually felt like a place of order and routine, suddenly carried a kind of stillness, like the air had shifted. She heard the faint hum of the heater, the scratch of Emma's pencil as she doodled while the adults talked, and the sound of her own heartbeat echoing louder than she wanted to admit. Claire had been single for a long time. She had buried herself in lesson plans, grading, and late nights of preparation, convincing herself that her students needed her focus more than anything else. But as she sat there across from Daniel, she felt an ache she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. It was not overwhelming, not inappropriate, it was quiet. A soft pull at the edge of her heart, reminding her she was more than just a teacher. Daniel spoke with a gentleness that surprised her. When he talked about Emma, his words carried weight, like he had thought about every detail of her growth. He didn't brag or exaggerate. He simply cared. And that kind of care was rare. The longer the meeting went on, the more Claire noticed the contrast between the man's steady composure and the tired look in his eyes. It was the kind of tiredness that came from carrying more than one person's burden. She didn't ask this, wasn't the time or place, but she felt it. And it stirred something deep inside her. She wondered what his life outside the classroom looked like. Did he rush home after long days of work to cook Emma dinner? Did he help her with homework at the kitchen table, even when he was exhausted? Did he sit up late at night making sure she was okay before finally allowing himself to rest? These weren't questions a teacher was supposed to ask. But they filled her mind anyway, uninvited yet impossible to ignore. And in the middle of those thoughts, she caught herself. She shifted in her chair, refocusing on her notes, speaking about Emma's creative writing skills and her thoughtful participation in class. But no matter how carefully she spoke, she could feel Daniel's gaze, warm, steady, and deeply attentive. For the first time in years, Claire felt like she wasn't just another professional giving information to a parent. She felt like someone was listening to her as the meeting drew on. Emma leaned closer to her father, showing him a drawing she had made earlier. Daniel chuckled softly, his voice low and rich, filling the quiet classroom. The sound of his laughter struck Claire unexpectedly, like a spark in a room she thought had grown dim. And in that moment, as ordinary as it seemed on the surface, Claire knew something had shifted. This wasn't just another meeting, another evening in a long line of evenings. There was a weight in the air, a current running quietly between her and Daniel. Unspoken but undeniable. It was supposed to be just a parent-teacher conference. But Claire already felt that this night would stay with her long after the classroom lights were turned off. The conversation was moving smoothly, the way most parent-teacher meetings did. Claire continued talking about Emma's progress, pointing out how much effort the girl put into her assignments. She showed Daniel a few of Emma's essays, praising her creativity and imagination. Daniel listened carefully, his expression a mix of pride and quiet reflection. Emma, sitting between them, had been drawing quietly on a piece of paper. Every now and then she'd glance up, listening to fragments of what the adults were saying before returning to her sketches. It seemed like she was only half-eye interested in the meeting until she suddenly spoke up. "Ms. Bennet," Emma said in a soft but clear voice, "I wrote a story about you." Claire blinked, surprised. She turned to Emma, curious. "A story about me? What kind of story?" Emma smiled, her eyes lighting up as though she had been waiting for someone to ask. "It's about a princess," she explained eagerly. "She's really kind, and she teaches children in a big castle. And one day she meets a king. He's lonely because his castle feels too quiet. But then he smiles again because the princess makes it warm and happy." The words hung in the air, simple and innocent, yet carrying a weight that none of them expected. Claire's heart skipped a beat. She felt warmth rising in her cheeks, unsure how to respond. She knew Emma's imagination was strong. She often wrote stories full of magic and emotion, but this one was different. The way Emma looked at her, the way she described the princess, it was as if the child had seen something beyond the classroom. Daniel cleared his throat quickly, shifting in his chair. His eyes dropped to the table, his hand brushing over Emma's shoulder. "Kids and their wild stories," he said with a nervous chuckle, trying to lighten the moment. Always turning real life into fairy tales. But his voice wasn't as steady as before. And for the first time, Claire noticed the flicker of something deeper in his expression and emotion he wasn't ready to name. Claire smiled gently at Emma. "That's a beautiful story," she said. "Maybe you can bring it to class sometime. I'd love to read it." Emma nodded happily. But she had already returned to her drawing, humming quietly as if her secret had been shared, and that was enough. For her, the moment had passed. But for the adults in the room, it lingered. Daniel sat straighter, avoiding Claire's eyes for a moment. When he finally looked up, his expression was softer, almost unguarded. There was no denying the tension between them now. Not sharp or uncomfortable, but fragile. Like a thread stretched between two people who hadn't planned to connect but suddenly had. Claire shifted her papers, trying to bring the conversation back to Emma's schoolwork. She spoke about reading goals, math progress, and participation in class discussions. But no matter how carefully she stuck to the notes, her thoughts kept circling back to Emma's words. A princess, a king, a smile returning. Children often said things without meaning too much. But Claire couldn't shake the feeling that Emma had seen a truth adults often tried to hide. She had described her teacher with innocent honesty. But she had also revealed something about her father, that loneliness in him that even Claire had sensed the moment she met him. The silence between them grew heavy again. Claire glanced at Daniel, and he met her eyes briefly before looking away. There was something vulnerable in that small exchange, something that made Claire's chest tighten. Daniel broke the silence first, his voice quieter this time. Emma has always been creative. Sometimes she puts things into her stories that, well, they catch me off guard. Claire nodded, her voice steady but her heart racing. Children often notice more than we think. They see emotions even when we don't put them into words. Daniel gave a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. She does have a way of saying what I can't. For a moment, Claire wasn't just a teacher talking to a parent. She was a woman sitting across from a man whose life carried unspoken struggles. She wanted to ask him more, to understand what Emma had hinted at in her story, but she reminded herself of her role. This was a classroom, not a place for personal questions. Still, the unspoken connection hung between them, undeniable. Emma, oblivious to the quiet shift between the adults, pushed her drawing across the table. "Look," she said proudly. "It's the princess from my story." Claire looked down and saw a sketch of a woman with long hair, standing beside a castle window. Next to her was a tall figure with a crown, a smile just beginning to form on his face. It was simple, childlike, but powerful in its honesty. Daniel looked at it too, and his lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't laugh this time. He didn't brush it off. He just stared at it for a moment, then reached over and gently ruffled Emma's hair. "That's beautiful," he said softly. His voice cracked slightly, as though the drawing had touched a part of him he rarely allowed to be seen. Claire felt her heart ache in ways she hadn't expected. It was such an innocent moment, yet it carried so much weight. She realized Emma wasn't just showing her imagination. She was revealing a truth about her father's life, about the quiet loneliness he carried, and in that small, ordinary classroom. It felt like 3 lives had suddenly intertwined in a way none of them had planned. Claire knew she should bring the meeting back to its professional course. She straightened the papers again, forcing herself to talk about upcoming assignments and reading lists. But deep inside, she knew that nothing would erase what had just happened. Emma's words had pulled something hidden into the open, and neither she nor Daniel could pretend otherwise. When the meeting reached its natural close, the silence felt heavier than before. Claire gave Emma one last smile and told her to keep writing her beautiful stories. The girl nodded happily, unaware of how deeply her words had changed the room. And as Daniel stood to leave, Claire caught his eyes again. This time, there was no avoiding it. Just for a second. He looked at her with an expression that spoke more than words could. Gratitude, vulnerability, something unspoken, but real. It was supposed to be a simple parent-teacher meeting, but a child's innocent story had unlocked a truth neither adult had been prepared to face. And as the classroom door opened to the quiet evening outside, Claire knew nothing about this night would feel ordinary again. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the end of the scheduled meeting. Yet Daniel did not rise from his chair right away. Most parents were quick to thank her, gather their things, and leave. But he lingered, his hand resting lightly on Emma's shoulder, as though he was weighing whether to say something more. Claire stacked the papers neatly, trying to give him space to decide. She told herself this was nothing unusual. Some parents needed reassurance. Some carried worries they didn't always put into words. But the look on his face was different. He wasn't just concerned about grades or test scores. His silence carried something heavier. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet, thoughtful, and edged with something raw. "I just want to thank you." Claire looked up, caught off guard by the sincerity in his tone. "For what?" "For more than the teaching," Daniel said, glancing briefly at Emma, who was still busy with her drawing. "This year's been hard. Emma's been through a lot. Her mother, she doesn't live with us anymore. It's been just the 2 of us for a while now. And I've worried about her. Worried if she'd feel alone, if she'd lose her spark. But you've given her more than lessons. You've given her something to hold on to." The words struck deeper than Claire expected. She felt the air grow heavier, not with discomfort, but with the weight of trust. He didn't owe her this confession, yet he had offered it, letting her glimpse into the private corners of his life. She softened, her voice careful, steady. Emma is remarkable. She's strong, curious, and full of kindness. Whatever challenges she's faced, it's clear she carries love with her. And that comes from you, Daniel. Their eyes met across the table. In that moment, the classroom didn't feel like a professional setting. It felt like a place where two people had quietly stepped into honesty. She saw in his gaze not just pride for his daughter, but also weariness. The kind that comes from carrying responsibilities alone. Daniel exhaled slowly, as though he had been holding his breath for too long. I try, he admitted, but there are nights when I wonder if I'm enough. When you're raising a child on your own, you're not just a parent, you're everything. And it's exhausting. But then Emma comes home, excited about something that happened in your class, and I see that spark again. For that, I'm grateful. Claire felt her throat tighten. She wanted to say more, to tell him he wasn't alone, to reassure him that his daughter's joy proved he was more than enough. But her role as a teacher held her back. Instead, she gave him a quiet smile and spoke with the gentleness she reserved for moments that mattered most. You're doing better than you think, and Emma knows it, even if she doesn't say it every day. The silence stretched again. Not awkward, but thick with emotion. Claire found herself studying the lines on his face, the way his tiredness mingled with quiet strength. She wondered how many nights he stayed up late, worrying over bills, homework, and the thousand unseen details of parenting alone. She wondered if anyone ever asked him how he was doing, or if he had simply learned to carry everything without complaint. Emma's laughter broke the moment. She held up another drawing, proudly showing off the castle she had sketched. Both adults leaned toward her, smiling, their shoulders brushing slightly as they looked at the paper. The touch was brief, accidental, but Claire felt it like a spark. Daniel chuckled, the sound warm and rich. Looks like you're becoming quite the artist, he told his daughter. Claire glanced at him, catching the way his smile lingered a moment longer than necessary, the way his eyes softened when they met hers. For a heartbeat, the three of them felt like something more than teacher, student, and parent. They felt like a small, unexpected family, joined by nothing more than drawings and stories, but it was enough to stir something deep inside. When Emma went back to coloring, Daniel lowered his voice. I hope I didn't overstep telling you all that. It's just, you're one of the few people Emma trusts. And maybe, in some way, I trust you too. Claire shook her head softly. You didn't overstep. Sometimes the things left unsaid matter most. And I think Emma's stories say more than any report card ever could. His lips curved into a faint smile, one filled with both gratitude and vulnerability. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the classroom heater filled the silence, steady and low. Wrapping around them like a blanket dot, Claire knew she should close the meeting, that she should stand, shake his hand, and guide them to the door. But she couldn't bring herself to end it so quickly. She wanted to hold on to this moment, the rare honesty that had slipped through the cracks of formality. Emma suddenly yawned, stretching her arms wide. Dad, can we go home now? Daniel looked at her with gentle amusement before turning back to Claire. I suppose we should let you close up. You've probably had a long day. Yes, Claire admitted softly. But this meeting didn't feel like the others. The words slipped out before she could stop them. She instantly felt her cheeks warm, hoping he wouldn't read too much into it. But Daniel didn't tease, didn't question. He just gave a slow nod, as though he understood exactly what she meant. They stood together, Emma hopping up from her chair with a grin, ready to head home. As Claire gathered her notes, Daniel lingered one more moment, his voice calm but steady. Thank you, Claire. Not just for tonight, for everything. Her name on his lips sounded different, personal, almost tender. She looked up, meeting his gaze, and in that single second, the unspoken connection between them deepened. Then Emma tugged at his hand, and the spell was broken. The moment passed, but the feeling lingered. Claire walked him to the door, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. It had been a simple conversation, nothing inappropriate, nothing out of place. Yet beneath the surface, something had shifted. Daniel had shown her his vulnerability, and she had let him glimpse her empathy. Between them, a quiet bond had formed, fragile, delicate, but undeniable. As the classroom door closed behind them, Claire leaned against her desk, taking a long breath. This was supposed to be another ordinary meeting, but after tonight she knew it wasn't ordinary at all. It was the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. The hallway outside the classroom was nearly empty by the time Claire walked Emma and Daniel to the door. The building felt quiet now, with only the faint echoes of footsteps in the distance. Most families had already left, and the evening air drifting in through the open door carried the crisp chill of autumn. Emma bounced happily, her small hand in her father's, chattering about how she wanted to finish her story when they got home. Claire smiled at her enthusiasm, though her attention kept slipping toward Daniel. He walked beside his daughter with steady patience, but Claire noticed the way his eyes carried something unspoken, as though he had more to say but was holding it back at the doorway. Emma turned and hugged Claire tightly. "Good night, Miss Bennet," she said with a grin. Claire's heart softened. "Good night, Emma. Keep writing your stories. They're special." Emma nodded and skipped toward the steps outside, leaving her father and Claire standing side by side in the doorway. For a moment, neither moved. The cool night air brushed against them. Claire felt the quiet stretch longer than it should have. Daniel finally cleared his throat. His voice was careful, almost hesitant. "I don't usually do this, but I was wondering if you'd like to grab a coffee sometime, just as friends." The words caught Claire off guard, though she tried to keep her composure. Her heart skipped, warmth spreading through her chest. She told herself it was nothing more than a polite invitation, but the way he had said it, with a hint of nervousness, made it feel more meaningful. "As friends?" she asked softly, almost teasing. Daniel gave a small, self-conscious smile. "Yes. Emma talks about you so much, and I guess I'd like to know the person behind all those stories she brings home." The honesty in his tone disarmed her. He wasn't smooth or overly confident, he was simply genuine. And that touched her more than anything else could. Claire nodded, her smile gentle but steady. "I'd like that." For the first time that night, some of the tension seemed to ease from his face. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and his eyes held hers just a little longer than before. It was a quiet exchange, but it said more than words could. Emma's voice called out from the bottom of the steps. "Dad, come on." She was already halfway to the parking lot, impatient to go home. Daniel gave a soft laugh, shaking his head. "Duty calls." He glanced back at Claire one more time, his expression filled with something that made her heart a calm mixture of gratitude, vulnerability, and the beginning of trust. "Good night, Claire." "Good night, Daniel," she replied, her voice calm, though her thoughts were anything but. She stood at the door for a few moments after they left, watching the two of them walk away into the night. Emma skipped ahead, carefree, while Daniel followed with that steady, protective presence she had noticed from the start. There was a quiet beauty in the scene of father and daughter making their way through the world together, carrying both love and unspoken burdens. Claire closed the classroom door slowly, the click of the lock echoing louder than usual in the empty hallway. She leaned against the door for a moment, breathing deeply. She told herself it was just another meeting, just another evening at school. But her heart betrayed her, racing with the memory of Daniel's words and the way he had looked at her. She walked back to her desk, gathering her papers, but everything felt different now. The classroom, usually filled with order and routine, seemed almost too quiet. The drawings Emma had left behind still sat on the table, and Claire picked one up. It was the sketch of the princess and the king, the simple, childlike drawing that had changed the entire tone of the night. She traced the lines gently with her fingers. To anyone else, it was just a child's fantasy. But to her, it felt like something more, a reflection of truths Emma didn't fully understand, but somehow expressed perfectly. The princess who brought light to the castle, the king who smiled again because of hurt, wasn't just a story. It was a glimpse into a hope Daniel carried quietly, perhaps even unconsciously. Claire set the paper down, her chest tight with emotions she hadn't expected to feel. She had built a life of stability, choosing work and responsibility over personal dreams. She told herself it was enough that her students were her purpose. But tonight something inside her had stirred. Something she had long buried the desire to connect, to be seen, to be more than just the teacher behind a desk. She packed her bag, switched off the lights, and walked down the hallway. Each step echoed in the empty school, but her thoughts were louder than the sound of her heels on the floor. She kept replaying Daniel's voice in her mind, the way he had asked her so carefully, as if afraid she might say no. She kept seeing the softness in his eyes, the weight of his words when he had admitted how hard it was to raise Emma alone. By the time she reached the parking lot, the sky was a blanket of stars, clear and crisp. She stood for a moment by her car, looking at the night, letting the cool air steady her racing thoughts. She didn't know where this would lead or if it would lead anywhere at all. But she knew this. Something had shifted tonight. It had started as a simple parent-teacher meeting, the kind she had sat through countless times. But Emma's unexpected story, Daniel's quiet honesty, and the invitation to coffee had turned it into something else, something she couldn't ignore. As she drove home, the city lights passing by her window, Claire felt a quiet mix of hope and fear. Hope for what could come from this fragile new connection. Fear of what it might mean to open her heart again after so many years of keeping it closed. But above all, she felt alive. More alive than she had in a long time. The night had begun like any other. But as she pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment in the stillness of her car, she whispered to herself what she already knew deep down. Sometimes the most ordinary ski evenings hold the beginnings of the most extraordinary stories.